In the ancient portrait hanging quietly in the museum's gallery, there is a small detail that few people notice. The woman's hand is covered by a white glove. Under the soft yellow light, the thin cloth seems to be hiding something. A secret that should not be seen. The woman in the painting is Lady Charlotte Peyton, a Victorian aristocrat. But behind that gentle smile and calm eyes, history whispers of horrors hidden deep in the basement of Peyton Manor. More than a century later, a young researcher accidentally discovered strange traces in that photo. And from there, the door to the past began to open, leading to creepy clues, acid stains on the wall, hastily carved symbols in stone, and desperate letters from the dead maid. That glove, does it just hide a wound, or is it evidence of something much more sinister? Today, join me in listening to that story, the story of Lady Charlotte Peyton and the terrible secret hidden beneath the white glove. It was an October morning, the kind that holds its breath. Mist draped itself over the honey-colored stones of Peyton Manor, softening the sharp edges of a house that had stood since the 17th century. Antique appraiser Rachel Morrison had attended hundreds of estate sales before, but this one felt different. Perhaps it was the silence that followed her through every corridor, or the way the rain pressed against the mullioned windows, as if listening. In the drawing room, surrounded by heavy Victorian furniture and faded family heirlooms, Rachel's gaze caught something on the mantelpiece, a large sepia photograph framed in walnut. A family portrait dated 1898. There stood Lord Reginald Peyton, tall and solemn, behind his seated wife, Lady Charlotte. 4 children, 3 girls, 1 boy, were arranged carefully around them, each one frozen in the precise stillness demanded by the cameras of their time. But it wasn't their formal posture that unsettled Rachel. It was Lady Charlotte herself. Her right hand, bare elegant, adorned with glittering rings, rested naturally. But her left was covered by a black lace glove, dark and delicate, yet oddly prominent, almost as if it had been placed there for a reason. Beneath the lace, the hand seemed misshapen. Too rounded in places, too stiff in others. Rachel lifted her magnifying glass. The glove's outline wasn't right, and there was something else, a shadow beneath the lace that didn't quite belong. Lady Charlotte's expression only deepened the unease. Her eyes, wide and distant, seemed to hold a sadness too heavy for the stillness of the moment. The rest of the family smiled faintly dutifully, but she did not. Rachel bought the photograph anyway, along with several other pieces. She told herself it was for the craftsmanship, but part of her already knew. It was something else, curiosity. The kind that quietly whispers, "Don't look away." Back in her London workshop, beneath the white glow of her examination lamp, the secrets began to show themselves. Under magnification, the asymmetry became undeniable. One hand a live human, the other still and strange beneath its thin covering. The glove was not simply hiding something cosmetic. It seemed to contain something, perhaps a deformity, an injury, or something more deliberate, something the Peyton family had wanted history to forget. Rachel began to dig. She read about Victorian portrait customs, how families obsessed over appearances, how photographers positioned bodies to hide imperfections. But even that didn't explain the next detail she found: the children. The more she studied their faces, the more she saw what had been missed by the camera's long exposure. discomfort, unease, the faint red marks of tears recently shed. The eldest daughter's eyes were puffy, as if she'd been crying. The young boy's gaze, small, fixed, kept drifting toward his mother's gloved hand as if afraid of it. And there, almost invisible at first, a small dark stain marred Lady Charlotte's sleeve just above the wrist. The texture suggested it had been wet when the image was developed. Blood ink. Or something else entirely. Rachel had seen enough artifacts to know that stains, however small, rarely appear by accident. The next morning, she went to the British Library, chasing the Peaton name through fragile records and fading ink. Lord Reginald Peaton, a wealthy textile magnate from Manchester, who rose from modest beginnings to industrial power. Peaton Manor had been his triumph, purchased in 1885, a symbol of everything his factories had earned. Lady Charlotte, however, was harder to trace. Born Charlotte Pemberton, née Whitmore, she appeared in no genealogical registers before her marriage in 1878. No records of parents, no birth announcement, no lineage, which in Victorian society was almost unthinkable. Who was she really? And what did she bring with her to Peaton Manor, a secret so well hidden that even in death it needed to be covered by lace? The most disturbing discovery came days later deep within the local newspaper archives. Rachel, exhausted but driven by that quiet pull of curiosity, traced the Peaton name through yellowed pages of the Gloucester Echo. Between 1896 and 1899, she began to notice a pattern, faint at first but unmistakable once seen. There had been incidents. Unexplained accidents at Peaton Manor, all involving household staff. 3 maids, each in different years, had suffered strange injuries to their hands and arms. Burns. Blisters, deep wounds that required medical treatment. 2 of them left the manor abruptly, citing unsafe conditions. None would speak publicly about what had happened. Then came one article dated March 1898, just months before that haunting family portrait was taken. It told of a young scullery maid named Mary Fitzgerald, found unconscious in the manor's kitchen, her hands burned beyond recognition. The official cause was said to be boiling water, a tragic household mishap. But the physician's notes told another story. Mary, before she died, had whispered that it wasn't water at all. She never said what it was. Only that it burned unlike anything she had ever known. She died 3 weeks later of infection. Her family received a quiet, generous payment, and the matter was never spoken of again. Rachel felt a chill run through her. This was no coincidence. Determined to understand more, she reached out to Dr. James Whitfield, a local historian with a peculiar advantage. His great-grandfather had been the village physician during the 1890s. When they met at a small tea shop in Chipping Campden, the afternoon light fell softly on a weathered leather-bound journal he carried. "My great-grandfather was thorough," Dr. Whitfield said, opening the book. The ink had faded, but the words still carried a quiet urgency. He turned to several entries dated 1898. His ancestor had treated multiple servants from Peaton Manor, all suffering what he described as chemical burns, of unknown origin, always to the hands, sometimes the forearms. The notes suggested deliberate injury, not accident, and the person responsible, it seemed, had access to caustic substances. But one entry stood apart. September 15th, 1898. Called to Peaton Manor to examine Lady Charlotte's hand. Injury beneath glove, self-inflicted burn, possibly acid or lye. Patient insists it was an accident while gardening. Children present appear frightened. Advised hospital treatment. Patient refused. Most troubling case encountered. Rachel could almost hear the scratch of the old doctor's pen as she read the words. When she looked up, Dr. Whitfield's expression was grave. "My great-grandfather believed Lady Charlotte was harming herself," he said quietly. "And perhaps others. But he could never prove it." The family's wealth and influence silenced every question. And suddenly, the family portrait, the glove, the stain, the strange tension in those children's faces made dreadful sense. Rachel's investigation next took her to Manchester to the Industrial Heritage Centre, where the old records of Peaton Industries were stored. Lord Reginald's textile empire had thrived on innovation, particularly in chemical dyeing processes. But as Rachel sifted through the company's correspondences, she found something that didn't belong. Invoices, dozens of them, for large quantities of sulfuric acid sodium, hydroxide, and other corrosive agents. But the deliveries weren't to the mills. They were sent directly to Peaton Manor. Why would anyone need industrial-grade chemicals at a private home? One letter dated June 1898 carried a warning tone from the supplier. "Lord Peaton, we must express concern about repeated orders for concentrated acids delivered to your residence. Our insurance requires clarification as to their intended use, as these substances are dangerous when handled improperly." Rachel stared at the letter for a long time. The quantities were far beyond what would be used for laundry or cleaning. And yet, someone inside that house had been ordering them regularly. The staff records painted an equally grim picture, a constant turnover between 1896 and 1899. Resignation letters spoke of fear of unsafe work and of a mistress who spent long hours in the manor's basement. There, according to the servants, Lady Charlotte had created something she called her laboratory, a place no one else was permitted to enter. Rachel closed her notebook, realizing she had crossed a quiet line from curiosity into obsession. Still, she couldn't stop wondering, what was Lady Charlotte doing beneath Peaton Manor? And what secret could drive a mother, a wife, a woman of such standing, to hide her own hand behind lace? By now the pieces were forming a picture so dark that Rachel almost wished she hadn't started connecting them. Lady Charlotte Peaton, the refined matriarch immortalized in her family portrait, had not been a victim of misfortune, but a perpetrator of something far worse. She had used her husband's access to industrial chemicals, the acids and alkalis of his textile empire, not for housekeeping, but for human experiments. Her own burned hand might have been an accident during these acts, or perhaps an experiment upon herself, a cruel test of endurance. Armed with months of research and the weight of terrible suspicion, Rachel contacted the current owners of Peaton Manor. The once grand estate was now a luxury hotel, its corridors polished and repainted, its darkness hidden beneath layers of modern comfort. The manager, Mrs. Elizabeth Davies, welcomed Rachel, warmly intrigued by the historical angle of her work. "The manor's past fascinates our guests," she said, leading Rachel down the narrow stone steps that descended to the basement. The air grew colder. The smell changed faintly metallic, like old coins and rain. Though modernized, the space still bore traces of its age. curved ceilings, damp stone walls, and the heavy silence of rooms that remember. This used to be the wine cellar, Mrs. Davies explained. But there are things here we've never quite been able to clean. Rachel followed her gaze. On the walls and floor were dark stains, irregular sunken patches that seemed to have bitten into the stone itself. Decades of scrubbing hadn't erased them. Previous owners mentioned finding odd equipment down here. During renovations in the 60s, Mrs. Davies continued. Glass vessels, metal tools, nothing that belonged in a wine cellar. They threw it all away. Rachel's trained eye moved carefully along the walls, the way one might read a page. Near a newer partition, she noticed something faint scratches in the stone. When she brushed away the dust, the markings emerged clearly. Sepe Milocinamdioit. Below it, dozens of tally marks carved in uneven rows, and just beside them a wall, pitted with tiny craters, the telltale marks of acid corrosion. It wasn't random. The pattern suggested deliberate repeated contact. Rachel's breath caught. She raised her camera, the flash illuminating the wall for just an instant, enough to feel as though she had captured a ghost. She realized with a sickening certainty that she was standing in the room where Lady Charlotte had performed her experiments. Between two stones near the floor, something glimmered faintly. She reached down and pulled free a small glass vial, long forgotten, its cork fused by time. Later testing would reveal what Rachel already suspected are traces of concentrated sulfuric acid, the same substance that had burned the servant's hands and likely Lady Charlotte's own. But the story didn't end there. Through parish archives and local genealogy groups, Rachel began tracing the descendants of those who had once served at Peaton Manor. The names were scattered, but one led her to the quiet edge of the same village, to Sarah Murphy, the great-great-granddaughter of Mary Fitzgerald, the maid who had died in 1898. Sarah received Rachel in her kitchen, a humble space lined with family photographs. On the table before them lay a small bundle of letters, the paper yellowed, the ink fragile. "They were my Aunt Mary's," Sarah whispered. "She wrote them to her sister before she died. My family kept them hidden all these years. They were afraid of the Peaton name." Rachel put on gloves and unfolded the first letter. The handwriting trembled across the page. "Lady Charlotte calls me often to the basement, saying she needs help with her cleaning mixtures. But once down there, terrible things happen. She makes us place our hands in bowls of liquid that burn like fire. She says it is for her research that she is testing how long fabrics and flesh can endure." The next letter was worse. "She smiles when we cry. I think she enjoys it. She times us, watches our faces as the pain begins. Yesterday, she burned her own hand. She said she wished to know if she could bear it better than I." Rachel felt the air thicken around her. She read the final letter slowly, her throat tightening. "I do not think I shall live much longer. The infection spreads and Lady Charlotte forbids a doctor. She says my pain has meaning, that it will help her understand. If anyone finds these words, please tell the truth of what she did." The silence that followed was unbearable. Sarah folded the letters back into their cloth, wrapping her eyes, wet but steady. "I think she wanted someone someday to listen," she said softly. Rachel later shared the letters with Dr. Sarah Chen, a forensic pathologist who specialized in historical trauma. In her London office, surrounded by photographs and magnified scans, Dr. Chen spoke with quiet certainty. The pattern described in these letters, she said, is consistent with deliberate chemical burns. The rate of infection, the spread of tissue damage, all of it points to repeated exposure. This was not accidental. This was controlled pain. Dr. Chen studied high-resolution images of the 1898 Peyton portrait, zooming in on the black lace glove. The swelling here, she noted, tracing the outline with her pen, is typical of acid scarring. The stiffness suggests permanent disfigurement. She's concealing it, yes, but she's also displaying it. It's positioned deliberately in the center of the frame. She paused, thoughtful. It's almost as though Lady Charlotte wanted history to see her, but not understand her, to admire the lace and never question what lay beneath. Dr. Chen was the first to notice what Rachel had missed. Under high magnification, there were faint specks across Lady Charlotte's gown, not dust, but tiny burn holes, the kind created by acid droplets. Even the delicate lace glove bore irregular edges as if scorched long ago. And there, along the fingers of her exposed right hand, the faintest discoloration, a chemical stain. This woman, Dr. Chen murmured, was not merely hiding an injury. She was living within it. Her conclusion was chilling. Lady Charlotte Peyton, by every modern understanding, displayed what would now be called sadistic personality disorder. Someone who derived pleasure from inflicting pain, shielded by wealth and the walls of her own home. The portrait, Dr. Chen believed, was taken in the aftermath of one of her last experiments. Perhaps it was an attempt to preserve normalcy, to fix her family's image in time before the truth began to seep through the cracks. The glove was not just an accessory of modesty or decorum. It was a mask concealing not only scarred flesh, but the disfigured soul beneath. Rachel thought that might be the end of her discoveries, until she found the letters. They were tucked among the legal archives of a London firm that had once represented the Peyton family, an exchange between Lord Reginald and his solicitor, written in the brittle winter of 1898. My wife's condition, one letter read, has deteriorated beyond my ability to manage. The staff live in terror, and I fear her experiments will end in a death that cannot be disguised. I have consulted with Dr. Morrison regarding possible treatment for her mental affliction, but she refuses all help. The reply came days later in measured legal phrasing that barely veiled its alarm. Given the recent death of the Fitzgerald girl and inquiries from her family, I strongly advise immediate removal of Lady Charlotte from the household. The payments to the families have been generous, but our capacity to contain rumor is not infinite. Consider a private sanitarium before the matter grows unmanageable. But Lord Reginald never did. His following letters showed the same weakness that often shields horror, fear of scandal. Instead of confinement, he relocated his family to London, sold the estate, and cited his wife's failing health as reason for departure. And so Rachel realized the portrait, that carefully arranged tableau of Victorian composure, had been taken in haste, a final attempt to preserve a family's illusion before they vanished from the Cotswolds altogether. Lady Charlotte's lace glove hid more than disfigurement. It concealed a history of cruelty, privilege, and silence, one permitted by a society too polite to question its own monsters. 6 months later, Rachel stood beneath the high vaulted ceiling of the National Archives auditorium. Every seat was filled. Before her, projected onto the screen, was the Peyton family portrait, the glove gleaming faintly beneath the archival light. Her voice was calm but heavy with meaning as she spoke of her findings of the burns, the letters, and the silence that had lasted over a century. In the front row sat Sarah Murphy, the great-great-granddaughter of Mary Fitzgerald. Tears streaked her cheeks as the final slide appeared, a close-up of Lady Charlotte's gloved hand. "For generations," she said afterward, her voice trembling, "our family lived with shame, told that Mary was clumsy, careless, the cause of her own accident. To know now that she was a victim, that she was murdered by her mistress, it hurts, but it also frees us." The owners of the Peyton Manor Hotel responded with grace. They commissioned a memorial plaque in honor of Mary Fitzgerald and the unnamed servants who had suffered beneath Lady Charlotte's hand. The basement, once the site of unspeakable acts, was converted into a small museum dedicated to the hidden lives of Victorian domestic workers. Dr. Chen published her findings in a medical journal, noting the case as one of the earliest recorded examples of systematic sadistic abuse disguised by domestic hierarchy. And Rachel, who had begun all this because of a single glove, watched as the portrait was carefully reframed, ready for its new home in the museum's quietest gallery. Under the softened light, the photograph no longer looked like a symbol of family pride. It had become evidence, a confession in plain sight. Rachel stood for a long time, tracing the line of the gloved hand with her eyes. For more than a century, it had concealed everything: the burns, the pain, the truth. But time, as always, has its own kind of justice. Lady Charlotte's secret was finally unwrapped, and the silence that had protected her dissolved into remembrance. The glove had hidden more than flesh. It had hidden the cruelty that only history patient and unblinking would dare to reveal.